So now that you have been introduced to changing from words into math, we're going to apply that into word problems. So these word problems involve some sort of formal pieces, and the one thing that you want to keep in mind is some of them, especially at first, they're going to start out fairly easy, and you're going to find that it might be easier just to guess and check and get the answer. But they do start to get harder, especially as you get higher up in math, and there is value in learning the formal process of how to be converting into words into math, and then making a formal equation and solving the equation. And in the end, you'll actually find it's actually faster to use algebra and equations to solve problems instead of guessing and checking. There's absolutely nothing wrong with guessing and checking. It's a great method when you're not sure what else to do. But for these, I do want you to follow a set process with them and to practice how that process works. So just be patient with it and give it a chance. So the first thing that you have to do is create something called a let statement. And what a let statement does is it allows the person reading your problem or someone looking at your solution to understand what the variable represents. So when we use a letter like X or Y, that letter represents something, and you're making a statement to say this letter is going to represent this thing. And that's what a let statement is. So if we look at the first question here, it costs 3 times as much to go to the movies as it does to buy popcorn. A movie and a popcorn together costs $18. So what you have to do is come up with an equation. So the first thing you have to do is come up with a let statement. So there are 2 things that you don't know. You don't know the cost of the movie, and you don't know the cost of the popcorn. So a really good hint is your variable is going to be one of those 2 things. Now, it can be either one, but one is going to be easier than the other. So what you're trying to do is look for a statement where one thing is written in terms of the other thing. The other little hint that works almost every time is whatever is mentioned second is usually what your variable should be. So in this particular example, it's 3 times as much to go to the movies as it is to buy popcorn. Popcorn's mentioned second. The movies are written in terms of the popcorn. See how it says 3 times as much as the popcorn? Movies is written in terms of popcorn. It is going to be easier for X to be the cost of popcorn. Because if X is the cost of popcorn, then the movies would be 3 times that, or 3X. If you did it the other way around, which would also work, if you let X be the cost of the movie, then popcorn, because the movie is 3 times the popcorn, if X was the movie, popcorn would have to be X divided by 3. And then you're introducing a fraction, and it's a lot harder to work with fractions in an equation. It's not impossible. Mathematically, you can do it. It's just more difficult. So let the cost of the popcorn be X. That's going to be our let statement. And then what would the movie be? Because it's 3 times as much, the movie, the cost of movie, would be 3 times the popcorn, or 3x. Now we have to come up with an equation. So the really important thing here is it says movie and popcorn together costs $18. So that means movie plus popcorn is 18. So if we had to come up with an equation then, if we had to turn the words into math, we notice that, well, we told ourselves that the movie was 3x, and we told ourselves that the popcorn was x, or 1x, and that's my equation. Now, if you wanted, you could also write this as your equation. And then you can go ahead and you can solve it. In this case, it didn't say, it just said write an equation to solve, but if you did go ahead and solve, you would divide both sides by 4, and then you would end up with 450. And that would be the cost of the popcorn. And to get the cost of the movie, you would then just do 3 times 450. Whoops, I wrote 1450 almost. So 3 times 450, which would be 1550. Nope, Sorry, 1450. Where's my eraser? Nope, sorry. Brain fart today. It would be 1350. So there would be the cost of your movie. There would be the cost of your popcorn. So let's look at another one. These are not easy to do, but once you kind of get the hang of it, there's a sort of process that you follow. And you get a mark for that step. You'd get a mark for the equation. You get a mark for solving it. So you're going to have built-in steps. So let's look at this next problem. So it says Mark has $33 more than Madison, and together they have $95. Again, we're going to come up with an equation to find how much each person has. So remember, to figure out what x is, you want to figure out which one is written in terms of the other one. And remember the hint I gave you that usually the one that is mentioned second is the one that the x will be. And so in this case, Mark has $33 more than Madison. Mark is written in terms of Madison. Madison is mentioned second. Madison is going to be x. So not Madison, I guess, but let Madison's money, let the amount of her money be x, and then the amount of Mark's money. Because Mark has 33 more, again, you've got to think about turning words into math. How do we do 33 more than x? Well, that would be x plus 33, or 33 plus x. It's the same thing. Now we have to come up with the equation. And the second thing the question told us was that together they have $95. So what does that mean? It means that Mark plus Madison is 95. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky. A lot of people just want to write x plus 33 equals 95. But be careful with that. That, x plus 33, that's just Mark's money. We also have to add Madison's money. So be really careful. Mark's money is x plus 33. Madison's money is x. So together, if you wanted to simplify, you would get that. There's your equation. Then you would go ahead and you would solve your equation. So let's look at one that we're going to solve incompletely, and one that isn't structured in this way, because typically you're not going to have questions with fill in the blanks. You're going to have to do that yourself. So here is an example that I want you to read. So the sides of a triangle are 3 consecutive whole numbers of centimeters, and it tells you what the perimeter is, and then it asks you to find each side. So this one's a little bit tricky. Because it doesn't say one side is 2 more than the other, or 3, the third side is 5 less than the first side. And it uses this word consecutive whole numbers. So first thing you have to do is figure out what that even means. So consecutive means in a row. So for example, 5, 6, and 7, those are consecutive whole numbers. 11, 12, and 13 are consecutive whole numbers. If it said consecutive even numbers, you'd have 10, 12, 14. Or consecutive odd numbers, maybe 21, 23, 25. So it just means in a row. So the thing that's tricky here is there is no statement where something's mentioned second. And so there's no statement where one thing is written in terms of the other. All you know is that it's a triangle. So if you think about a triangle has 3 sides. So what could x be? Well, has to be one of those 3 sides. It can't be all 3. X, and it can't be the perimeter. Sometimes people will say, oh, x is the perimeter. X is never going to be something that you know. X is always going to be something that you don't know. So in this case, you don't know the sides of the triangle. But in this case, the sides are different. So x can't just be all 3 sides. It has to be one side. So it's going to be easier for you to say, let x be the smallest side. Now, again, it gets a little bit tricky because there is no statement that says one side is 2 more than the other. So how are we going to get the middle side then? Well, remember, they're consecutive numbers. So in my example of 5, 6, 7, if you knew the first number, how are you going to get the second number? Well, how do I go from 5 to 6? I just add 1. And so that's going to be my next number. So let x plus 1 be the middle number. Why 1? Because consecutive numbers are 1 apart. Using that same logic, how would we get the next number? Well, we'd add 1 again, or we would be adding 2 to the original. And so the next number, if we added another 1, well, what's another 1 on top of x plus 1? Now you're at x plus 2, and that's going to be the longest side. Now, just as an aside, if this was a question that said consecutive even numbers or consecutive odd numbers, like 2, 4, 6, or 11, 13, 15, the only difference is that consecutive odd or consecutive even numbers, they are 2 apart. So instead of doing x, x plus 1, x plus 2, instead of being 1 apart, you would do x, x plus 2, x plus 4. Now, some of you might also be wondering, could I have said x is the middle side? And then the smallest would be 1 less than that, x minus 1. And the longest would be 1 more, x plus 1. The answer is yes. You might be wondering, could x have been the longest side? For sure. If x was the longest side, then the middle would be x minus 1, and the smallest would be x minus 2. So there's lots of different options. I'm kind of just going through kind of what would the easiest. The easiest is always to add, and so that's what I'm going through, but there's lots of different ways that you could write it. So now we have our let statement. If this was a question, you would now have 1 mark for doing that. So now you need to come up with an equation, and you will get 1 mark for your equation. So perimeter. Perimeter is 57. Well, how do we find perimeter of a triangle? Well, we just add all the sides. So we're going to add side 1, smallest side, plus side 2, middle side, plus side 3. But we have to create an equation. We have to make it equal to something. So we're going to make it equal to 57. You'll get a mark for doing that. If you prefer to simplify, you could also write it like this. Or at some point in solving it, you might write it like that. So now you've got 2 marks. You've got a mark for your let statement. You've got a mark for your equation. Now all you have to do is solve your equation. So remember, when we're solving, we have to get rid of the 3 first. Then we're going to divide both sides by 3. And we're going to get 18. Get a mark for solving our equation. These questions will all be out of 4. So now we've got to figure out the actual answer. Don't forget, don't do all of that and then forget the answer. So the question actually says, how long is each side? So now you have to go, okay, if the first side is 18, what would the other ones be? Well, because they're consecutive numbers, we would say, therefore, the sides are 18 centimeters, 19 centimeters, and 20. They're consecutive numbers, so they're all one more than the other. So I want you to try some of these. Try your day 1 problems. You might come in, you might run into some trouble. Work with a friend, call your teacher over for help. They are hard, but you are going to start to figure out the process and figure out that it's actually not as hard as you think if you read carefully and break it down into steps.